Hello, this is Dave from the Wizard's Keep in Muncie, Indiana, and today I'm continuing counting down my top 80 board games of all time. With this video, we finally made it, my top 10 favorite board games of all time. And at number 10 is Pursuit of Happiness. Now, Pursuit of Happiness is a worker placement game where if you've seen several of my other videos, you will know that I'm a big fan of worker placement games. This one, I really like the idea because your workers are units of time. You've got like these little wooden hourglasses which represent your time, and you're placing those in different spots on the board that trigger different actions. Well, another thing I really like about it is the theme. The theme of it is each person is basically playing a character that is going through their life cycle. So you start off as a teenager, and then every turn is like a decade until you're a feeble old man or old woman. And your goal is to live the happiest life as possible. How you do that is by using your workers or your time to gather different possessions, like you could get like an entertainment center or a board game collection or whatever it might be that makes your character happy. Or you can involve your character in different projects, different activities to generate happiness for that character. You also can develop romances, relationships, which take up some of your time as upkeep, but they can also generate different happiness. Or you can get different jobs, which theoretically could generate happiness, but ideally those generate resources for you that allow you to be able to purchase those different possessions or to upkeep those relationships or to participate in those activities. And that's what I really like about it, is by the end of the game, not only have you played a strategy worker placement game, but you've also generated a story for your character. And that's why I like Pursuit of Happiness. My number 9 favorite game is a worker placement game by Uwe Rosenberg. Now, Uwe Rosenberg has been mentioned several times in this list because he's probably my favorite designer. But though this is kind of, as I put this list together, I kind of had a soul-searching moment because typically my top 10 is dominated by Uwe Rosenberg games. Because, once again, he's one of my favorite designers. And now Uwe Rosenberg still makes the most appearances in this top 80 list, but a lot of his games have kind of dropped a little, and actually most of them were in the previous video, my 20 to 11. So this is my highest ranked highest ranked Uwe Rosenberg. And so what I meant by soul searching moment is because another designer might be taking his place, as you'll see later in this top 10 video, as another designer is starting to dominate the top 10. But for this Uwe Rosenberg game, it is a 2-player only worker placement game where the interesting thing in it is, in addition to being a typical worker placement game where you're placing different workers on spots to generate actions and resources, you play it's over the course of several years that you're playing as your farmers in the, farming the fields of Arl. But each turn alternates between you have a summer turn and a winter turn. So in the summer turns, you can only fulfill particular summer actions, whereas in the winter turns, you get to fulfill different actions. And so you have to kind of plan those ahead each turn. The other thing about Fields of Arl, though it does have a feed your people mechanic to it, it's really minor and very easy to feed your people. So it's probably what also moves it toward the top of the list because it is a well-designed, it has all the things I like about a Uwe Rosenberg worker placement game, but without that kind of annoying feed your people mechanic that kind of dominates some of his other titles. My number 8 favorite game is by the designer Shem Phillips, and this is part of his North Sea trilogy, and that is Raiders of the North Sea. Raiders of the North Sea, also a worker placement game, but its nice twist is on your turn, there are 2 different types of actions you can take. You can place workers to go on raids because it's a Viking themed game. So you can kind of go raid neighboring or coastal villages, and by raiding you basically place a worker on that spot and raid that location for its resources. Or you can decide to stay home, and that's where you got to get this kind of interesting positional battle of the worker placement game. Because in the home section of the board, it has this concept of place a worker for an action, and then pick up a different worker that has been previously placed on the board. Because each turn you start with one worker, and you can either go raiding, which you place that worker on the spot, pick up the resources and the worker that's at that raiding spot, or you place it on the home section, which is you place the worker there and pick up another worker and trigger 2 actions that turn, and now you have another worker to start your next turn with. I really like that positioning at the home area, where you're trying to plan out maybe turns ahead each time based on where different workers are located, because you're ideally, if you want, there's 2 actions you want to perform on the home board area, one of those places has to be empty and one of them has to be occupied. They'll do both of them in the same turn. And I think it's just kind of a neat mechanic and things you have to kind of think of when you're playing the game. And that's why I like Raiders of the North Sea. My number 7th favorite board game is a pick up and deliver game, Empire Builder. Now, Empire Builder is kind of one of those quintessential Euro games where it has this design of a theme of you're running a train empire, your train barons. But I really don't care that much about trains. But it's really about the mechanics of the game. And this one has like some of the most elegant pick up and deliver mechanics. And what I mean by that is essentially the game. It is literally picking up things and delivering them. What you do on your turn is, you start the game with so much money, and you use that money to buy tracks, or what you do is it's kind of have a dry erase board, and you draw these lines on the board, connecting dots that kind of represent the tracks of your infrastructure of your rail empire. And you use those tracks to be able to move your train across, going to different cities, picking up goods to take them to other cities to fulfill different contracts that you have. Now, each contract has 3 different options on that contract that you can fulfill, you can turn in to get money. And you always have 3 different tickets as well. And that's part of the fun of this game, is that kind of puzzle of seeing those 3 tickets with 3 different destinations on them and trying to puzzle out, what's the most efficient way to fulfill all of those tickets? Meaning, ideally, you want to be picking up goods from a similar region. So let's say you're picking up tobacco in Savannah, Georgia, and you're also picking up cotton in Atlanta, Georgia, or something like that, and to be able to take them to a similar location across the board. So maybe you can drop a cotton off in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and you're dropping off that tobacco in Phoenix, Arizona. So that would be an ideal kind of play, because you're picking up the goods in the same area and taking them to and dropping off in a different area of the same region. And you take that money that you earn to pay for more tracks to kind of build your infrastructure, or you can also upgrade your train, giving it more load capacity, or also giving it more speed so it can make those deliveries faster. And in the end, there are smaller cities and there are major cities. Whoever connects 6 of the major cities to your tracks and gets to $250 million first is going to win the game. And that's what I like about Empire Builder. My number 6th favorite game is an action selection game, Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, every turn, when it's your turn, you're going to select a role or an action. And then after doing so, everybody else is going to kind of do that same action. So that's part of the interesting strategy of this game that I really like, is whoever picks an action gets a benefit for picking that action. For example, let's say you pick the builder action, will let you build buildings in your kind of colony in Puerto Rico. You get a discount of 1 money to any building that you purchase for picking that action. But then everybody else gets to build a building in turn order. And that's the thing I really think is neat about this game. Because in a lot of games, you kind of try to figure out and decide, what is the best thing for me to do? And then you do that action. In Puerto Rico, you've got to be careful, because you got to figure out what's the best thing for you to do that doesn't help somebody else out more. So, like, for example, if you were wanting to pick the builder, so the builder is the action that benefits you most, but it's really going to benefit me too, you pick that building action, and then I'm like, well, gee, thanks, and then I will build. Now, I could probably pick the builder action on my turn if I wanted to as well, but if you pick it for me, that means on my turn I get to pick another action which is going to benefit me, and I really like that dynamic in the game. And that's what I really like about Puerto Rico. My number 5 favorite game is by designer Shem Phillips, and now he did the Raider or the North Sea trilogy, which had Explorers of the North Sea, Shipwrights of the North Sea, and Raiders of the North Sea, which was previously in this. Explorers I believe was number 80 on my list, and Raiders was earlier in this video. But this is his new trilogy, and that is the West Kingdom trilogy. And my number 5 here is Architects of the West Kingdom. Now, Architects of the West Kingdom is also a worker placement game. And it kind of seems where his North Sea trilogy, each game was a little different. Raiders was a worker placement, Explorers was a tile laying game, and Shipwrights was a card drafting take that game. It feels like his West Kingdom trilogy is all going to be worker placement, because we found with Raiders of the North Sea that worker placement is really, I guess, his where he excels at. And Architects is no exception. In Architects of the West Kingdom, you place different workers on the board, but you don't have like a pickup phase where you have like in other worker placement games, meaning everyone place their workers, at the end of the turn you pick your workers back up. In Architects, you're just swapping turns back and forth with the other players. There really is no end of phase. So you just keep placing, you have a pool of workers and you just keep placing them on the board. And some locations, a lot of the resource generation spots, you're going to place a worker, generate as many resources, like I say maybe it's stone or wood. You're going to generate as much stone or wood based on the number of workers you have there. So the first time you place a worker, you get 1 wood. Next time you place a worker, now you have 2 workers there, so you get 2 wood, and so on. So, but then there's another mechanic in the game where you can go arrest people, I guess, for gathering. Like they're out there in the woods picking wood, and you're like, there's something sketchy going on about them woodsmen. Why are there so many of them out there? So you can actually send one of your workers to go out and arrest either your own workers to get them back in the pool, or to arrest rival workers, which you can kind of sell to the prison for money. The benefit of that is, well, getting the money that you're selling the workers to the prison to, but also it kind of keeps resetting your opponent, because if you let them sit out there too much, that means every action they take, they're exponentially getting more resources. So you don't want to let your opponents build up too many workers in one spot. So you got to decide when you're going to take that action to arrest one of your opponent's workers. And that's one of the neat things about the Architects of the West Kingdom, is it just has a neat system of how the workers keep cycling in, and those decisions you have to make. And that's what I like about Architects of the West Kingdom. My number 4th favorite game is another worker placement game, and that is viticulture. In viticulture, what you're doing is each person kind of owns a wine company, and you're placing different workers on the board to generate actions like you do in all worker placement games, but ultimately you're trying to plant different set up different vineyards, plant different vines that you're going to be able to harvest to produce different kind of wines. You have to kind of store your wine and age your wine. In each turn, you've got like a different chart on the board where you're kind of sliding these tokens along to kind of represent that you're aging the wine by 1 number each turn. Because the older the wine, the more valuable the wine. So you're able to sell older wine for more victory points. You also have to kind of expand your capacity. Either your storage facilities allow you to hold wine longer, or different type of vineyard technology to grow certain types of grapes, and also to collect these different contracts that allow you to sell different wine for victory points. The other neat mechanic is that, especially with the Tuscany expansion, which is one of the best expansions of all time, it adds a new board to viticulture, which allows you to have different seasonal phases. And sort of like Fields of Arle, you've got different worker placement spots based on the season. But in viticulture, it's all 4 seasons, and you start with a large group of workers at the beginning of the year, and you got to decide which season you're going to place them in. So you may not place any workers in the spring, for example. You just pass, so you have those workers available to place in future seasons. So there's lots of different decisions to make, and that's what I like about viticulture. My number 3rd favorite game is kind of an area control game, I guess, and that is Clans of Caledonia. Clans of Caledonia uses a very similar system to probably the more popular sci-fi game, Terra Mystica, which I liked okay, but Terra Mystica actually didn't make my top 80 games, but here Clans of Caledonia is near the top. And maybe it's this is not a Uwe Rosenberg game, but it kind of feels like a Uwe Rosenberg game. It uses even the same art style as a typical Uwe Rosenberg game. And maybe that's why by subconsciously appeals to me. Maybe I really do like farming. But in Clans of Caledonia, each player plays a different ancient Scottish clan. And based on that actual historical clan, they've got different special abilities kind of based on the actual historical clan. Like one clan is able to sell their milk that they produce for more money. Another one is able to age their whiskey better and be able to sell it for more money and use all those money to basically kind of expand your farms, allowing you to place different farms and facilities on the board. Which kind of generates your engine. And what you use that engine for is to fulfill different export contracts. Because the way the game is kind of set up, it is designed at the kind of Scottish area, Caledonia, is known for certain kind of resources like cheese and milk and bread and whiskey, but it doesn't. But so you take those resources that you can generate and you export them to kind of bring in figuratively other resources like sugar cane and cotton. And tobacco. And though you don't use those resources, they basically just represent victory points. But then that's what I really like about Clans of Caledonia. My number 2 favorite game, and here's the kind of theme for my top 10, possibly the new designer. Maybe as he designs more games, maybe he will replace Uwe Rosenberg for me. And that is Shim Phillips' Paladins of the West Kingdom. Now, like Architects before and the Raiders also in this video, this is a worker placement game as well. But its interesting twist to it is that you get different types of workers. Kind of like Orleans, which I mentioned in my last video, where you take these different types of workers and you're placing them on worker placement spots to generate actions, but they have to be certain configurations of those workers. Let's say you need a red worker, which represents a knight, or a black worker, which represents like the clergy, to do different actions. And you kind of put those in different combinations to generate your different actions. And you've got to kind of balance between your faith, because in order to do certain actions, you also have like a threshold that you need. You need like your military, you need your economic power, and you need your spiritual power. And you kind of have to keep those in a balance. So you can't just keep doing one strategy over and over. You have to kind of find a balance between all those strategies. But at the same time, there are also lots of different options in a very point salad type of concept. So you do have a lot of different choices. You don't have to do the same strategy over and over. But at the same time, you can't neglect the particular strategy too much. So it's very, very thinky. I really like that concept of like trying to figure out which type of workers do you want to get. How do you build this balance to where you're raising your faith up so you can be at the threshold you need to go do the military action that you want to do that gives you economic power that you can go do another action. And I really like that about Paladins of the West Kingdom. Now, my number 1 favorite game of all time. Every time I've done this list, this is the second time I've compiled a list of videos. Prior to that, I just wrote articles compiling my list. The first time I believe I did a top 40 list I wrote on Facebook. Then I did a top 50 list that I wrote on Facebook. Then last time I did a video series of top 60. And now my top 80 games. The same game just keeps rising to number 1. Now, when I kind of, for all these games in general, hopefully you're able to learn something about these games, something that appeals to you, something you want to check out. But these are just my opinions. These are what I like about these games. They may not be your favorite games, but this is what I like about them. And if you hear something about that lets you want to check them out, even if it's a game that I don't like that much, but it really appeals to you, please do check it out. But I want to kind of put that as saying, this is my favorite game of all time, but it may not be your favorite game. Now, a little background is when I got into gaming, what got me into gaming initially was playing role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons. And then later, I started playing the collectible card game Magic the Gathering. And that's what kind of got... I used to play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons in high school, but I really didn't get part of the gaming community and hanging out at the Wizard's Keep, and then later become an employee of the Wizard's Keep until I started playing Magic. And which then ultimately allowed me to take over and become the owner of the Wizard's Keep. And that is, with all that background, that is partially one of the reasons why this game is my number 1 game. And that is the Pathfinder adventure card game. And the reason being is Pathfinder is basically another name for Dungeons and Dragons by a different company. But they, so it's kind of like the Dungeons and Dragons card game. So it has a lot of those elements that really appeals to me of Dungeons and Dragons, of the kind of concept of like leveling up your character, going on adventures. It has a campaign mode to it, so it kind of tells the story over a campaign as you level up your character or your adventure deck that you build in this game. So it has that Dungeons and Dragons appeal to me that I always have a fondness for. But then it's also a card game that kind of tickles some of those urges I got from Magic. The concept of customizing your deck. Which cards do you want to keep in your deck? How can you try out getting new cards and acquiring those new cards and be able to say, oh, next time I play, I can't wait to see how this card works or how these cards work together. And that's another thing you're able to do in the Pathfinder card game. Because ultimately what you're doing, it's a cooperative game. So everybody's working together. You're kind of an adventurer party. Each person builds your own deck of cards, and those what your configuration of those decks is based on the character class you're playing. So you're playing a wizard character, you're going to have more spell cards in your deck. If you're a fighter character, you're going to have more weapon cards or more armor cards in your deck. And then you play through a series of scenarios. And most of those scenarios, you're searching for a certain villain or a bad guy in a series of location decks. Those location decks are each a deck of cards, and when you encounter or go to that location, you counter the top card of that deck, drawing that card. And if it is some sort of monster or obstacle or trap you have to overcome, you have to fight it using dice and cards from your hand. Or it might be a new item that you can find, a new spell, a new weapon that you might be able to pick up and acquire. And then ultimately each scenario has its own kind of rewards. But in addition to that, at the end of the scenario, you have to reconfigure your deck back to its original size. But you get to pick and choose which cards you keep. So let's say you found a better spell, you found a better weapon. You can keep that card, kind of jettison the weaker version. So as the game goes on through the campaign, your deck is going to get more and more powerful and more dynamic. And that's what I like about Pathfinder, the adventure card game. Well, thank you for checking out this series of videos. As always, if you have any questions about any of these games or any games in general, feel free to shoot me a message on Facebook, comment on YouTube, or stop into the Wizard's Keep. Until then, thank you for watching all these videos and good gaming.